Thank you so much for including me on this panel. Revolutionary greetings to everyone. I'm very honored to be a contributor to Toward Freedom with such a long history of anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, independent journalism, and I'm very appreciative to be on this panel. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow Danny Shaw up, but I'm going to try. I love movies and probably too much television, but I do love movies. So my contribution to Toward Freedom is appropriately film reviews because I love movies and because people often think of movies as just entertainment. But when we remember or understand, for those who do not know, that Hollywood is the propaganda arm of the US military, and by extension, it's the propaganda arm of the domestic law enforcement apparatus and of US militarism and imperialism abroad, then we realize that movies are not just entertainment at all. To be clear on the role that the US military and the CIA have been involved in with American movies and television shows, you should know that right now, and for at least 1945, if any filmmaker in this country wants to have representation of US military equipment in their movies or television shows, or they want to recreate locations of military actions in their films or shows, the script has to be approved by the Pentagon in order for military equipment and bases, military bases, to be used as props, right down to the body armor and the weaponry. So, what does this mean in terms of the movies that we watch? Well, here's one example that I'm sure we can all relate to: the movie franchise Transformers, with all of the military equipment in those franchises. Yes, the Pentagon approved those scripts and provided the equipment for the Hollywood studios to rent. If a filmmaker makes a movie about war, it has to be approved by the Pentagon so that the narrative that is approved by the Pentagon about the events in that war aren't like covered over by pesky things called facts. For example, there was a 2002 movie called Wind Talkers about US Marine Joe Enders, who was assigned to protect Navajo code talker Private Ben Yazzie during World War II. And that movie was only approved by the Pentagon after its director, John Woo, who is one of my favorite actors, made 3 changes to the script that the Pentagon demanded that he make. One was that he could not show in the movie any US soldiers looting the gold teeth of fallen Japanese soldiers. That was considered too brutish. Second, the film couldn't have Enders slaughtering Japanese soldiers who had surrendered. That was considered too brutish. And third, a scene of a higher ranking officer ordering Enders to kill Private Yazzie in the event that he, Private Yazzie, was captured by the Japanese had to be removed because, that would be so mean. But the thing is, all 3 of these incidents actually happened. There's documented evidence of these war crimes, because that's what they are, actually occurring with Enders and Private Yazzie, but the Pentagon considered these depictions inconsistent with the military's guiding ethos. So you have to wonder, what is the US military's guiding ethos? But it's not just the Pentagon that is involved in the approval of narratives in US movies. It's also the CIA, and honestly, every intelligence agency in this country. The CIA has had a hand in the production of movies and television shows like Black Hawk Down, the television show The Americans, another one of my favorites. And if you couldn't have already guessed it, the Showtime series Homeland, which is actually based on an Israeli series called Prisoners of War. And interestingly enough, the creator of the Israeli series, Prisoners of War, revolves around 3 Israeli prisoners of war who were captured on a secret mission in Lebanon. And the creator of that series is also a co-developer of the Homeland series in the United States. So you've got an Israeli propagandist co-developing and contributing to an American series about national security that the CIA is also contributing to. So you know that in the US series Homeland, every Arab is a terrorist, torture is justified, and the US is innocently defending itself from foreign attackers who they haven't done a thing to and are all just looking for justice in the pursuit of national security. But the reason the US is meddling in the affairs of other countries in the first place is never disclosed in Homeland, just like it's never disclosed in the original series Prisoners of War why Israeli agents were in Lebanon in the first place. So when we understand the depth of the Pentagon and the CIA and the FBI's involvement, and NSA's involvement in movies and television in the US, we shouldn't still be thinking that any movie is merely entertainment as much as we might enjoy them. And like I said, I love movies. And that's doubly, maybe exponentially true for any movie that documents Black struggle in this country. And I specify this country in particular because maybe, at least for me, one of the greatest problems with films in the US that try to claim to document Black struggle, especially films depicting the lives of notable figures in the Black struggle, the long history of Black struggle in this country, is that the stories are limited to involvement in the struggle in the US alone, right? Now, thinking of like many people's favorite movie about one such figure, Malcolm X, Spike Lee's Malcolm X. Aside from the many departures from the autobiography of Malcolm X that the director Spike Lee takes in the film, and there are many, the only international connection that is depicted in that movie that Malcolm X had was his pilgrimage to Mecca. And we remember in that movie, it was there that we're supposed to believe that Malcolm was miraculously enlightened to realize that all people weren't, actually devils. And then he came back to the US a changed and less angry man. As entertaining as the movie was and is, it is actually the farthest thing from the truth. And more egregious to me, from the departure from the historical account of in the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the artistic license that Spike Lee takes with the movie, this lack of the international connections that Malcolm X had, particularly in Africa, is even more egregious to me, because Malcolm traveled to Africa in 1959 while he was still with the Nation of Islam, visiting Ghana, Sudan, and Nigeria on behalf of Elijah Muhammad. And there's nothing in the movie really about his extensive travels around the continent after his pilgrimage to Mecca. And there's nothing in the movie about him meeting with Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, with Egypt's Gamal Nasser, and with Algeria's Ahmed Ben Bella. Why is this important? Because all of those men were not only Pan-Africanists, but they also wanted to work with Malcolm upon his return to the US to further global Pan-African unity. And in fact, it was the Organization of African Unity, organized chiefly by Kwame Nkrumah, that inspired Malcolm to form the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the OAAU, upon his return to the US to fight for human rights of Black people here and to foster unity with Africans and all people of African descent around the world. Malcolm even returned to Egypt 2 months later, after he started the OAAU in New York, to the second Organization of African Unity meeting as a representative of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And even though Spike Lee's movie about Malcolm X doesn't make much of his efforts to strengthen Pan-African unity, the important thing about the omission of this information from that movie is that the FBI took a great deal of notice of it in real life. Because ahead of Malcolm's trip to Africa, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover wrote in a memo dated July 2nd, 1964, that the OAAU was a threat to the national security of the United States. And the FBI even wanted to convict Malcolm under the Logan Act, which forbids negotiating with foreign governments having a dispute with the United States. Now, I focused so much on Malcolm X, that movie, because its director is Black. And I hope that's an example, that's a good example, I think, that we can't always trust directors who are not white to tell the story of Black struggle in this country, or the people involved in Black struggle in this country accurately either. As much as we can't trust the Pentagon and the CIA and the NSA and the FBI from altering movie scripts to present the narrative of empire. Look at the focus on the informant that the movie Judas and the Black Messiah had, right? Now, of course, the purpose of the movie was to tell the story of the informant. I mean, the movie is called Judas and the Black Messiah. But we learn very little about the actual revolutionary politics, especially the internationalism of Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party, which is part of the problem with that movie in particular, and the movies about Black struggle in this country that are produced by Hollywood in general. They may tell a part of the story of struggle in the US, but they rarely reveal how Black leaders and Black people have almost always connected our struggles to working class and poor people around the world in solidarity. And that is by design. The other thing I think that too many movies about real life struggle in the US does is to convey this tone of syrupy conciliation, right? But heavily on the side of Black people who need to understand, the racist white people. We need to understand the unjust legal system. We need to understand, the horrors of enslavement and its legacy. It's over now, and we need to understand these brutal killer cops, and we need to stop being so angry and just understand. The idea that's conveyed in too many movies about Black struggle in this country is that if Black people, the people who are oppressed and are struggling for our freedom, liberation, rights, and humanity in this country, were more patient and understanding about how confused and just misguided individual racist people are, that those individual racist people would suddenly soften their hearts and be better. The golden rule and all that kind of stuff. But that is bull, of course. And in a few, if any of these movies is the entire system of white supremacist capitalism ever discussed or mentioned, so it's never indicted, it's never called into question. So Black struggle in this country in regard to the movies that are supposed to focus on Black struggle is always relegated to a few, awful, hard-hearted white people, as opposed to the systemic and foundational rot of racialized capitalism and inhumane barbarity that is at the very root of the establishment of the colonies on this soil, that includes the near genocide of the Native American people, and the growth and prosperity of this country and the expansion of US militarism and imperialism around the world. Why is this a problem? Too many people get their information about our history from these movies. As I said, I love movies. I love watching movies. I love going to the movies and the movie experience. But we have to be clear that movies, even documentaries sometimes, um, have gaping holes in their narratives as far as what the truth is, the actual history of how things happened. Like, do you notice whenever you see a movie about World War II in this country, it's always that the United States won the war and never about the Red Army. That's by design. But the same country that never tells the truth about who actually won World War II and defeated the Nazis, it was not the US, it actually was the Soviet Army, the Red Army, is the very same country that spins these narratives about countries and leaders like Nicaragua, calling their leaders communist, evil communist dictators, like Honduras, calling their leaders evil communist dictators. The entire US military imperialist project in Latin America was and is all about really stealing the resources from those people, but it was all shrouded in this narrative of anti-communism, the Red Scare. And so much of the political and police repression of Black people struggling for our liberation in this country and around the world today is also centered around smearing Black people with the tag of communists, just as they did during the civil rights movement and before. Because remember, Martin Luther King Jr. was supposed to be a communist too. So independent media like Toward Freedom fills those gaping holes and corrects the narrative about these representations in popular media about real life struggles that we are going through in this country. I am not at all advocating that we should stop watching movies, because I don't think I can stop watching movies. I'm not saying that we should stop watching television shows. Not sure that I can do it for a long period of time. What I am saying is that we need to remember that entertainment, all of it, all entertainment is propaganda. And we have to be very clear that Hollywood is in bed with the Pentagon, or Pentagon is in bed with Hollywood, however you'd like to frame it. And the US military industrial complex, the US imperialist government, the capitalist government of this country, the militaristic juggernaut that is the US, the white supremacist, racialized capitalism that is this country, and its imperialist doctrine and global hegemony is the narrative. And really, that is the power behind what kind of movies get approved in Hollywood and what those movies and the ideas that those movies convey. And it doesn't matter what kind of movie it is, if it's comedy, if it's a war documentary, even if it's a horror movie. And I think one of the few examples of a movie that escaped that kind of ideological propaganda control of Hollywood and the Pentagon was, interestingly, Candyman. And I did do a review of the sequel, that recent movie, In Toward Freedom. I was surprised by that movie. But there are few movies about Black struggle in this country like Candyman that are very clear. And interestingly, it's a horror movie, but it is so steeped in the reality of our struggle that it might as well be almost a documentary, almost a very serious movie. But there are so few movies that are as clear and honest in its ideology, I think, as Candyman, even documentaries, that I think we always have to be on guard as anti-capitalists, as anti-imperialists, as Pan-Africanists, honestly, as I am myself, and as people who are committed to international solidarity with working class and oppressed people around the world against the imperialist hegemony of the United States and the West, that as we're watching these movies, we have to keep in mind who's controlling what we see on the screen. It is not the screenwriters. It is not the directors. It's not the technical advisors. It is the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA. It is the US capitalist imperialist system that's producing our entertainment. So without independent media like Toward Freedom, we wouldn't know the truths that are hidden in the cracks or covered over behind some of the worst movie propaganda in the US that is passed off as just entertainment. So I'm very, very proud of my contribution as a film critic to Toward Freedom, because I think that critiquing film entertainment from an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, Pan-Africanist, international solidarity lens is just as important as the work of actually being 10 toes on the ground, boots in the streets, radical struggle is. We all have a place in this struggle, and I'm very, very proud to do my part. Thank you so much, and watch a good movie soon.